It's the final of the Julius Baer Generations Cup, and we have Magnus Carlsen against Alireza Firouzja, two of the very best blitz players in the world. And whenever these two are playing, the crowd is the big winner. There's always something brilliant happening in their games, also some very bad moves. Of course, what else can you expect from blitz games? You cannot blame these two top players making mistakes under time pressure. But this is something you absolutely want to see. Also in this game, brilliancies, bad moves, and some fantastic creative ideas created by world's best chess players. Well, let's dive straight into the action. One little favor, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Here we go. Magnus opens the game with one knight f3, c5. So we do transpose to the Sicilian opening. d6, bishop b5 check. And black blocks here with knight d7. Still a lot of different ways to play this position. Magnus goes for a very solid positional approach with castling kingside. Black hits the bishop with a move a6. And the bishop goes back to e2. Knight f6, attacking the pawn on e4. White just defends it with a move d3. Doesn't look very ambitious at first sight, but does keep a lot of play in the position, as we will see. Black goes for e6. White goes for a4, intending to go a5 and clamp down on this pawn on b7, so that the bishop cannot be developed. So black plays here the move b6 first. And now interesting little idea. Knight fd2 feels like anti-positional to drop back with a knight while the other pieces are still waiting to be developed. Bishop to b7, knight to c3. Black goes with his knight to e5. And white comes forward with the pawn to f4. This move comes with tempo. The knight is kicked again, but the knight is heading for a better square. Now on c6, it's ready to come into d4 at some point. Queen e1 played, so the queen is on its way to the king side. Maybe g3, maybe h4. Now if you do go knight d4, guys, then bishop will come back to d1 to defend his weakness. And very soon white will go knight e2. So white is doing okay here, and well, if you can trade off that knight on d4, it's a small success for white. So anyway, black doesn't play that move, goes for bishop e7, knight f3, queen c7, queen comes to g3. Here you see the queen is hitting the pawn on g7, and obviously black doesn't really want to bring his king to that side of the board when he's about to face a dangerous attack. Instead, g6 played. Maybe a small weakening move. Dark squares are less secure now, but difficult for white to take advantage of it. Bishop d2. Now finally white has completed his development. Rooks are connected. And before bringing the king into safety, black played here the move h5. Interesting idea. White goes for the move h3 to prevent the knight maybe coming to that square g4 at some point, but black plays h4, attacking the queen. If you do take that pawn, there is knight takes e4. Black regains the pawn as it opens up the path for the bishop. If you take back, there's bishop takes h4. Black is in excellent shape. So white should not be tempted. Taking that pawn, queen goes back to f2. Now the knight comes into h5. And you see the knight is on his way to g3. Rook fe1 played. The bishop comes to f6. Trying to gain control over the dark squares, especially the d4 square. On a good day, maybe that bishop can land on d4, attacking the queen and the king on the same diagonal. Knight goes back to d1. Castling queenside played here. White plays c3. So the pawn takes over control over that square. And that knight will soon rejoin play. Knight g3, knight e3. A lot of maneuvering here so far. Black goes for the move d5, opening up the center. You may even take the pawn here. If you do take, black takes back, the knight comes to g4, attacking the bishop. It looks to me that white is gaining a nice grip in the center with these knights. However, Magnus is opting for a closed structure, advances the pawn to e5 to hit the bishop. Bishop goes back to e7. And here, this bishop on e2, it's standing in the way of the other pieces, comes back to d1. Black makes a waiting move, king b8. And here rook b1. So you see white is looking at ideas to open up the queen side, probably with a move like b4. And therefore black says, no way, I'm playing the move c4 here first. This is even a pawn sacrifice. The pawn can be taken here twice. But if you do take, then the knight comes into e4. And all of a sudden black's pieces are coming alive with the bishop on an open diagonal. The other bishop can come to c5. For example, if you go queen e2, the pawn comes to d4. If everything comes off the board, all of a sudden black's pieces are super active. And I'm fearing here for white's life. So Magnus understands the potential danger and says, no way, I'm keeping the position close. Played here the move d4, giving away that e4 square once again. Knight e4, queen e2, knight g3, queen f2. There's a potential repetition. There's not much else white can do. Knight e4 would lead to a repetition, but here Alireza shows that he doesn't have respect for Magnus. I mean, of course, he respects him, but not in a 1-to-1 fight. He really wants to play for more, get the most out of his position. Played here the move knight a5, making it harder for white to ever go for the move b4. Bishop comes to c2, and the knight comes even in to b3. Nice idea. Bishop is doing great on c2, by the way. But also the knight now comes to g5 to hit the pawn on f7. Note that black is not interested in doubling the pawns on the g-file, as now there's this long-term weakness on f7, which is under threat. It's still defended, but I mean, you got to keep that pawn defended with your queen or maybe with the rooks. Feels really unpleasant with the potential traffic down that f-file. So black played here the move, rook to f8. Knight h7 here, tickling the rook. Rook goes back. The knight also goes back to g5. And here it's Alireza who says, okay, if you want to repeat the moves, I'm fine with that. But this is like a man-to-man fight. Here you see that both players are delivering punches. It's a psychological game. And none of them are really looking for a draw, but they are checking out what the opponent is going to do. And here it's Magnus' turn to say, okay, here, I'm the one continuing the game. He played knight f1 to get rid of black's most annoying piece. Bishop comes to c6. So ignoring the knight, if you do take, then eventually the pawn on a4 will be hanging. First bishop goes to e3, which is also important because if you do actually take on g3 and move the queen away, the queen also has that defensive task supporting the bishop. So therefore bishop e3, knight goes back to f5, and here bishop takes on f5. No, this is move 33, and it's the very first capture of the game. That's not something we do often get to see. So that is kind of a spectacular thing. Now a lot of people are still waiting for the action. Well, it's yet to come. G takes f5, queen takes h4. Now white captures the pawn, and black captures the pawn on a4. Now both sides have their assets on their own sides. White on the king side, black is looking for ideas to push on the queen side very soon. Queen comes back to f2, and black starts marching forward with that pawn. I mean, there's no immediate threat, but later on, when things are becoming sharper, you really would like to create a passed pawn at some point. Knight g3, b5, knight h5. Black goes for the move b4. Knight comes into f6, and the bishop goes back to b5. So it's making the path clear for the a pawn. Pawn at some point will come to a3 to break down that pawn chain of white. White goes now for the move h4. You can see that if that pawn lands on h7, it's a big nuisance. It really keeps the black rooks busy. King b7 played, h5, the pawn comes further. But now, black responds in time. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes, and here the rook comes to h8 to attack the pawn. And well, there are also ideas to get maybe the rook to h6 to block the pawn and wrap up that pawn on f6. So pawns can become really weak. Well, there are different ways of playing here, but Magnus played it incredibly sharp and maybe very difficult to understand. He played this move g4. Pawn takes g4, and now he says, okay, I'm bringing the queen to h4 so that he defends the pawn and is ready to take on g4 at the right moment. And probably at some point he really wants to break open up the position with the move f4, f5 so that this rook eventually can invade on e7. Well, that is still a long way to go, but look at this. Black continues here with the move a4, and now Magnus opens up the position with the move f5, attacking that pawn on e6. And here, for your information, Alireza Firouzja is down to 6 seconds, so he needs to play incredibly fast. He is actually still relying on increments, so things are not too bad. But Magnus almost has still 2 minutes here. Pawn takes f5, and now c takes b4. I mean, these moves are so difficult to understand. Finally, white captures that pawn on b4, could have done earlier. Here, you can see the rook is wanting to come in to e7. So therefore the king goes away, leaving the 7th rank, king a6, bishop f2. Now you see rook e7 is coming. Therefore black blocks it with rook d7, guarding that pawn on f7 as well. But here the pawn comes to h6. You see the pawn is almost coming in to h7. And now big moment, but so difficult to find this big move. Black could have played here this move, queen b6, when that pawn on f6 is in huge trouble. Missed opportunity. Instead, they're followed knight e2, attacking the rook. Rook bc1, and the queen comes into f4. You see that Alireza is smelling blood here. He feels that this is his moment. He has this idea even to take on g5 the knight. And if you do take back, well, there is this idea with knight f3, forking the king and the queen. But there is bishop to e3. Very big move to attack the queen. Knight comes to f3. Knight takes f3. Queen takes f3. Queen is standing there. The rook cannot go to f1 as it hangs the bishop on e3. White played here queen f2. White now wants to trade off that annoying queen. Queen h3 played. Queen h2. And only now the queens are coming off the board. King takes h2 and the rook goes to d6. Black wants to win that pawn on f6. White defends it here with bishop g5. Both pawns are defended. But look at this. Rook takes f6. Fantastic. Rook sacrifice is now after bishop takes. There is rook takes h6 with check. Attacking the king and the bishop. King goes to g3. Rook takes f6. And here you see that for the exchange, black does have 3 very big pawns. But for now, they are still somehow blockaded by the king. Even here, white blocks the pawns with the move king f4. Looks like a nice move. And it's far from simple to convert for black. Black played bishop d7. Maybe not the best way of playing. Rook comes into e7 as announced. Bishop e6. And now the bishop is defending the pawns on the king side and in the center, but is neglecting the support of the queen side. Now rook a1, intending to win that pawn on a4. King b5, rook b7, check. There's no time for black to take the pawn. King gotta go back to c6, and here it's rook b8, keeping the pawn defended, and white is ready to take on a4. After rook g6 though, here Magnus feels like there is some danger. If he would have taken the pawn on a4, which is what he didn't do, there may follow this shot with g3, and the pawn is almost out of reach. Well, if you do have time on the clock, there are still very interesting ideas to keep the game going. For instance, you can play rook a7. It's not played in the game, guys, but it's so beautiful that I wanted to show it to you. If you now push your pawn to g2, there is this move b5 with check, and the rooks are taking away all these very important squares from the king. After king d6, it's rook b6 with a beautiful checkmate. Now, let's go back to the position. Rook a3 was the game's continuation. King c7, attacking the rook. Rook goes to b5, rook h6. Now, only now, white captures on a4 because g3 is no longer a threat. Rook h3. With a bit of imagination, you see that black will place a pawn on f6 with rook f3. Stunning mating idea. White, of course, it's his turn here. Goes for the move rook a7, check. So no time for black to create a mating net. But where's the king going? In fact, the king should probably go back to c8. But whenever you have to go back to the back rank with 2 rooks near your king, feels a bit unsafe. And instead, low on time, king c6 is the move played in the game. Only at this point, time is about equal. Magnus also is down to 7 seconds and is missing here a forced mate in 4 moves. If he would have played the move rook a b7, there's absolutely nothing, but nothing black can do against this mating idea with the other rook coming to b6. You can give 1 or 2 more checks. Let's say rook f3, king e5, rook e3, king f6. The checks are over, and if you play something like g3, there is rook b6 with checkmate. What a huge missed opportunity. Instead, Magnus played rook c5, and now the king is able to escape. Rook a6 was played. In fact, you can still try rook b5, trying to create this mating idea. It's a better move. Then white is probably still winning. However, there followed rook a6 check. King goes to e7, and now the king is walking to a safer part of the board. King g5, the king also still wants to participate. King f8, the king is really aiming for the g7 square, but now the king comes to f6. White is threatening. Checkmate. So rook h6 check to force the king to come back to e5. Now black pushes the pawn to g3 as the mating threat has been resolved, but the rook goes back to a1. Who is playing for a win here, in fact, because black is having a passed pawn, it's stopped by the rook, but white also is still having a passed b pawn to be launched very soon. If you play g2, the rook will block and white is okay, so that's not a good move. Rook h4 was played. Maybe b5 is an idea, but rook g1 anyway. Black played the move f4. White pushes the pawn to b5, and now, in this time trouble, it's black's turn to miss a big chance here. He could have played this move f3. It's the move you really want to play, but it's impossible to calculate the implications of this move because it hangs the pawn on g3. If you do take, though, there is this plan with f2, and the pawn is out of reach. After rook f3, trying to stop the pawn, it's rook h5. Wherever the king goes, there is rook f5. Trying to trade off that rook on f3, defending the pawn on f2, and well, the only thing you can really do here is sack the rook on f2, but after rook takes, the rook will come behind the pawn, and white is completely lost in this endgame. Anyway, back to the game. King e7 was played instead of the move f3, and black is threatening to give checkmate with the move f6. Rook c7 check, now it's white's turn to stop the mating threat in this endgame. Bishop d7 played. Now the pawn goes to b6. Look, that pawn is only 2 squares away. Fascinating stuff. So many insane tactical mating ideas in this endgame. And well, now black played the move f6. He's trying to force the king. Well, the king has only one move, in fact. King takes pawn. And now the move f3 was played. And this is a big moment because what should white do? I mean, still it is actually possible to take on g3. It was not played by Magnus. He can do that because after rook h5 check, well, what is going on here? There is king takes pawn, and if you do play f2, the rook comes behind. And here the very same idea with rook f5 no longer works. You can simply take on f5 and the bishop is not allowed to take back. So that would have won the game for white. Instead, they followed this move, b7. Which pawn is gonna queen first? Black played the move f2, and white played here this. Rook takes g3, and now both sides are about to queen their passed pawn. But if black does that right now, if you do play f1 queen, it's a huge blunder. It was not played by Firouzja, but it's important to realize that white can strike here with rook takes, d7 check. If you take back with the king, it's rook g7, forcing the king to go to the back rank, and then you promote the pawn with check and mate. Fascinating stuff. Let's go back. Therefore, instead of queening the pawn here right now, you first got to insert the move rook h5 to force the white king to go back to e4. Only now you promote your f-pawn, and well, white gave one more check on g7 with his rook, and the king goes not back to the back rank, of course. There is b8 queen with check. King e6 is played. The king is absolutely safe. And now it's very important that you cannot give another check with your pawn, as that rook on h5 is covering that square. You can simply eliminate a pawn, and it's black who's going to deliver mate very soon. Instead, there followed b8 queen, and in this position with white having an extra exchange, the material is absolutely irrelevant. It's about who is able to give the first check. Well, that is black now, so he can go queen d3. King has to go to f4, and now it's very easy for Firouzja. He goes rook f5, king g4, queen f3, king h4, rook h5 with checkmate. What an amazing game. 84 moves, and I have been watching this game from beginning till the end live, and I hope you did hear the same on this channel. Thanks for watching this absolutely fantastic, heroic fight between these two giants of the game. I hope you really enjoyed this game. Let me know in the comments your thoughts of it. And once again, don't forget to support the channel with your like, your subscription to the channel. And of course, there are possibilities also to leave a small donation via PayPal. So think about all your options, and I will see you soon again.